Now, while the overall numbers have largely stayed the same, when we look at the intensity numbers, we have seen the drop off. And what I mean by that is the percentage of manufacturers who say they're very confident about the future of their firm. It's declined with pretty much all manufacturers, a little less so with smaller manufacturers, but much more so with your larger manufacturers. In fact, those manufacturers have 50 or more employees. 2 years ago, 58% of them said they were very confident about the future of the firm. It's down 11 points to 47% this year. A similar decline among manufacturers who have 5 million or more annually in revenue. That very confident level has dropped 13 points over the last 2 years. We also asked manufacturers, when it comes to gross revenues, profitability, and capital expenditures, do you expect your company to see increases, decreases, or not much of a change in those three areas? And when you compare this year's data to last year's data, very similar numbers, not much change. In terms of increases this year, gross revenues, 36% of manufacturers expecting to see an increase in the gross revenues, 28% expect to see a decrease, 35% expected to stay the same. When it comes to profitability, they're pretty similar in terms of increase and decrease, like they were a year ago. See a little bit of tightening when it comes to capital expenditures, 29% increase, 26% decrease, but 43% expected to stay the same. Overall, these trends from last year are pretty similar to what we see this year. But when we look over the last 4 years, we do see a noticeable shift. And this is specifically looking at the percent who expect increases in these three areas. Compared to 2021, gross revenue increases are down 18 points. Profitability is down 7 points, and capital expenditures down 15 points. So while there wasn't a shift from a year ago, we do see a much more long-term slide in expected growth of gross revenues, profitability, and capital expenditures. Shifting a little bit to concerns, we addressed this in 2 ways in the survey. One, we asked an open-ended question among manufacturing executives. What would you say is the 1 or 2 most important issues affecting your business and its future success? And we took their own words, we grouped the responses together based on what they told us, and we found that 4 out of 10 manufacturers, 39%, mentioned something related to workforce. Finding quality and skilled workers, retaining the employees they already have. This was the number 1 issue affecting businesses and their future success in the open-ended format. We also found that it tended to be more pronounced with larger companies. 57% of the responses among executives of companies that had 50 or plus employees mentioned something related to workforce. It was noticeably smaller with those who had fewer employees. Outside of that, you have some similar issues kind of clumped together here in secondary. Inflation and rising costs, 26% mentioned that as an issue affecting their business and future success. The economy closely tied to that at 13%. The financial strain on customers and impact it's having on sales, higher interest rates, political environment regulation. You can see here, at the top of the list is workforce issues, but also the economy, inflation, and the financial strain is playing a very important role with manufacturers in the way it could impact their business or future success. This was done in an open-ended format. Next, we gave manufacturers a list of 20 different issues and asked them to rate each issue individually on how important it was to their company and the company's success. And we used a 1 to 10 scale, where 1 means it's not at all important, 10 means it's extremely important. And we're specifically looking at the extreme important percentages here. These are folks who rated it a 9 or 10 on the 1 to 10 scale. And as we saw a year ago, keeping qualified employees and finding and attracting qualified employees tops the list. 58% and 54% respectively mentioned those 2 issues as the ones that are most important to them and their company's success. Inflation comes in a close third at 46%, the cost of materials for your products, cost of employee salaries and benefits, and the cost of healthcare coverage all also top the list in the 40% or higher range. We wanted to look at a couple things here. One, what concerns or issues had seen a noticeable increase in the last year or two? And we identified 5 that saw the biggest increases. Inflation, which I mentioned at the beginning, had been the top issue, one of the top issues a couple years ago, at 49%, had dropped last year to 42, but it's bounced back up 4 points over the last year to 46%. Cost of employee salaries and benefits, which have been stable the previous 2 years, is up 5 points this year to 42%. We saw 6-point increases for economic and global uncertainty and federal government regulations. The biggest jump that we've seen over the last year is hacking and cybersecurity. A year ago was 14%. Today, it's doubled at 27%. That's where we've seen the biggest increases. Where we've seen the biggest decreases are in these two items. The cost of materials for your products, which in 2022 was the top concern among manufacturers. A year ago dropped 8 points. It's dropped another 6 points. It's down 14 points over the last 2 years. The availability and supply of materials for your products is down 18 points over the last 2 years. Just over last year, it's down 8 points from where it was a year ago. Obviously, workforce concerns are a key issue. So we've got a series of questions really designed to better understand what concerns manufacturers about these issues. First, we ask, how easy or difficult is it for your company to currently find qualified workers for new or open positions? 79% of manufacturers tell us it's difficult, either very or somewhat. A percentage, which you can see on the far right here, is very similar to what we've had in previous years. Only 4% of manufacturers think it's very easy. Only 14% believe it's somewhat easy. But that 32% who say it's very difficult is noticeably lower than what we've seen in years past. If you go back to 2021, 57% of manufacturers told us in our first survey that it was very difficult to find the workers they need. It dropped in 2022, dropped in 2023, and it dropped 12 points just in the last year alone to 32%. 25 points lower than where it was 4 years ago. And that drop has occurred with all types of manufacturers. When you look at it by size of manufacturer, by level of revenues, the numbers have dropped considerably from where they were 4 years ago. One of the reasons could be is that fewer manufacturers actually have positions that are open for hiring. 4 years ago, 58% of manufacturers said they were hiring. This year, only 52%. 48% of manufacturers tell us they do not have any positions open for hiring. And among those 52% who are hiring, when we ask them how many positions do you have currently open, most manufacturers, about 3/4 of them, are somewhere between 1 and 5 positions. A plurality, 43%, say 1 or 2 positions are open. So not a lot of jobs are open, even among those who are hiring. So what are manufacturers doing to address some of these long-term workforce challenges? We asked them, and we gave them a list and said, is your company doing or considering any of the following changes to address these challenges? And at the top of the list are the two that have been at the top of the list for the last couple of years: increasing salary and wages and offering employee training. Most manufacturers, over a majority, cite these two things that their company is considering to address some of these challenges they're having with workforce. Over the course of the last year, there were 4 areas where we saw noticeable changes or increases. These two in particular both went up. Increasing salary and wages is up 8 points where it was a year ago. Offering employee training is up 13 points, but also allowing for remote work and flexible schedules. A year ago, it was 23%. This year, it's 29%. And using artificial intelligence, only a year ago, 12% mentioned that. It's up 6 points to 18% this year. When you also look at this by type or size of manufacturer, you see a noticeable difference. Smaller manufacturers tend to focus largely on increasing salaries, which 70% of manufacturers who have less than 50 employees said that's what they're considering doing. A little bit smaller number who mentioned offering employee training and raising prices. But when it comes to larger manufacturers, those more than 50 employees, those who have more than 5 million in revenue, you can see a majority of them, which we've highlighted here in red, are doing more things, sort of an all of the above approach among larger manufacturers. Not only are they increasing wages and salaries or offering employee training, or in some cases raising prices, but they're also offering more competitive benefits. They're increasing recruitment efforts. They're automating and implementing new technologies and improving onboarding. They're doing much more than the smaller manufacturers who are primarily focused on just increasing wages and salaries. When it comes to salaries, 60% of manufacturers tell us they expect wages for their employees to increase this year compared to last year. That's a percentage which has been remarkably consistent over the 4 years that we've done this survey. Only 1% of manufacturers expect wages to go down. When it comes to benefits that they offer their employees, though, about a quarter, 26%, expect to see increases in benefits, 2% decrease, but most manufacturers say that's going to stay about the same as last year, which is a trend that we've seen over the previous 3 years. Health insurance, which is really important to a lot of companies as well. 60% of manufacturers tell us they do offer health insurance to their employees, which has been pretty consistent and similar to years past. What has changed, though, is when we asked those 60% of manufacturers who offer health insurance, do you expect the cost of that to go up, go down, or stay about the same? And 85% of manufacturers said they expect to see an increase in their healthcare costs this year. It had been pretty consistent the previous 3 years, but it was a 12-point jump this year in that question alone.
So Rob, you've hit us with a ton of data on manufacturers' concerns. And when I looked at the list, especially the open-ended question, that came down to two really key topics that we wanted to dig into with the focus group. The first was around workforce. And what you saw from the data is, the worker market has gotten a lot softer in the past year. You're able to find workers now, not as difficult as it was a year ago, but it's still very sticky. Employers are holding on to those employees that they have, though. The job hoppers aren't quite as frequent as they were, those folks that leave for a nickel or a quarter on the hour. And they're making a bigger investment in the employees that stay there. So the second thing that I always enjoy are stories that come out of this. And employers have really lowered their expectations of the skill level of people coming to work for the first time, of those new hires. And the number of stories I heard about tape measures were astounding, right? So there's people who couldn't read the tape measure, who held it upside down. One thought it was a thermometer. One manufacturer automated the whole process so that they didn't even have to worry about reading a tape measure. But my favorite was the guy who was installing aluminum siding with his tape measure and was measuring very carefully, pulled out the tin snips and cut his tape measure right in two. So it's a plethora of talent shortcomings when it comes to a tape measure. So we see those a little bit across the spectrum. And manufacturers are stepping up and understanding they just can't take their new hire and plop them on the line right away. It's going to take some training coming in to really make sure that they're able to contribute. And then the third area that we're seeing is just the explosion in creativity among manufacturers in attracting and retaining employees. In the past, when we would ask for stories about how employers were attacking this issue, we'd get a list of 4 or 5 different things. This year, when I went back to my notes, the list was 25 or 30 items long. Employers are much more willing to try an all of the above strategy. And what we're seeing is the employers that do that tend to have less issues in holding and attracting employees. The second issue was all around the economy. And when we started talking about the economy in the focus group, the first thing that people moved quickly to was inflation. And almost as quickly, they went from inflation to wages. So the discussion almost entirely centered on the increase in wages and where those were going to go over the course of the next year. There's very little discussion about materials, very little discussion about any of the other inputs that are going into the process. So manufacturers really saw the economy as really being an inflation issue, and that inflation issue centering mainly around employee wages.